41 minutes. That is the number that changed everything in this case. Not the DNA, not the surveillance footage, not the 8 months of carefully deleted search history that federal analysts spent weeks reconstructing from a seized device. 41 minutes. That is the window of time. Confirmed, documented, and now at the center of federal prosecutors' case, during which investigators believe everything that happened to Nancy Guthrie happened. 41 minutes between the last confirmed signal from her home and the moment the figure on the neighbor's camera disappeared from frame. 41 minutes that a forensic reconstruction of digital evidence has now mapped, almost minute by minute, in a way that prosecutors are describing as proof of something far more calculated than anyone initially understood. And the Google searches, traced directly to an IP address registered to someone Nancy Guthrie knew, don't just support that conclusion. They prove it was never going to happen any other way. Because the searches didn't start the week before she disappeared. They didn't start the month before. The earliest search flagged by FBI digital forensics analysts was conducted 243 days before Nancy Guthrie was last seen alive. 8 months and 3 days. A Tuesday afternoon in the spring, when Nancy was probably at her watercolor class or walking through Forsyth Park, completely unaware that someone she trusted was sitting somewhere with a device in their hands, typing her name into a search bar and beginning to plan. This is the full story of what those searches contained, what the 41 minutes prove, and what it means for a case that has gripped Savannah, Georgia, and the entire true crime community for months. Stay with me, because this one goes deeper than you think. Before we go any further into the evidence, before we talk about IP addresses and search histories and the forensic reconstruction of 41 minutes, you need to know who Nancy Guthrie was, not what happened to her, who she was, because that matters. That matters more than anything else in this video. Nancy Guthrie was 63 years old and had lived in the same house on Habersham Street in Savannah's Victorian district for 22 years. She had moved there with her husband Robert when their children were still in school. Robert had died 11 years before her disappearance, and Nancy had stayed, because that house was hers, because that neighborhood was hers, because the people on that street, the neighbors whose names she knew, whose children she had watched grow up, whose dogs she fed treats to when she passed on her morning walk, they were hers too. She had been a licensed practical nurse for 31 years, cardiac unit at Memorial Health University Medical Center. Her colleagues, when they spoke to reporters after her disappearance, used the same words over and over. Patient, calm, steady. The kind of nurse who didn't just do her job, but who understood that her job was fundamentally about making people feel less afraid. One of her former supervisors told a Savannah television station that Nancy had a gift for being present with people in the worst moments of their lives, that she had a way of sitting with fear without being overwhelmed by it. She had retired 18 months before she disappeared. The transition had suited her. She volunteered 2 days a week at a food pantry in the East Side neighborhood. She had started watercolor painting, which she described to her daughter as humbling and wonderful. She was taking a beginner Spanish class at the community center because she said she wished she had learned years ago, and it was not too late. Her daughter Carla told investigators that her mother had recently started talking about traveling, that she had a list of places she had never been and wanted to go before she got too old, and that the list was longer than most people's. Nancy had 2 adult children. Carla, who lived in Pooler and spoke to her mother nearly every evening. David, who lived in Atlanta and drove down once a month. By every account, from family, from friends, from neighbors, from former colleagues, Nancy Guthrie was a woman at peace with her life. A woman who had built something real and warm and full over 63 years, and who was in the middle of enjoying it. She had routines that everyone who knew her could describe. The morning walk to Forsyth Park at 6:45, the coffee she made before the walk, in the same ceramic mug her daughter had given her years ago. The afternoon calls with Carla, the Tuesday and Thursday mornings at the food pantry, the evenings at home, dinner, the news, a book, chamomile tea, and bed by 10 or 10:30. Steady, predictable, safe feeling. As it would turn out, that predictability was not incidental to what happened to her. It was central to it. The last confirmed normal moment of Nancy Guthrie's life was a phone call. Her daughter Carla called at 9:12 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The call lasted 14 minutes. Nancy talked about her Spanish class. She had mispronounced something in front of everyone, and they had all laughed, and so had she. She mentioned the neighbor who had stopped by earlier in the evening. She said she was tired and going to bed soon. She said she loved Carla. She said goodnight. Carla called again at 6:48 a.m. the next morning. No answer. She called 3 more times before 8 a.m. Still nothing. By 9:15, she was in her car. By 9:52, she was standing on the porch of her mother's house on Habersham Street, and the door was locked, and the car was in the driveway, and the lights inside were off. Nancy's purse was inside. Her phone was inside. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand next to an open book set face down, as if she had stepped away for a moment. Nancy Guthrie was gone. Carla called 911 at 9:58 a.m. Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police arrived at 10:14. They secured the scene, and within the first hour of walking through that house, the responding officers understood that what they were looking at was not a case of a woman who had simply stepped out. Everything was too still, too ordered. The chamomile tea on the kitchen counter, half full. The television remote on the arm of the chair. The slippers at the foot of the bed. A house that looked less like a place something violent had happened, and more like a place that had been carefully, deliberately returned to a state of normalcy after something violent had happened. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. The back door, a door from the kitchen to an enclosed patio, showed something different. The lock had been manipulated, not broken, not kicked, manipulated, with something that left faint, precise marks consistent with a pick or a bypass tool. The kind of marks that investigators associate with someone who has practiced this. Someone who knows how to open a lock without damaging it. Within the first 2 hours of the investigation, a neighbor's security camera footage was pulled. The footage from 1:47 a.m. that Tuesday night showed a figure moving along the left side of Nancy's house, the side facing away from the street, with slow, deliberate steps. Dark clothing, dark cap, moving without urgency, moving like someone who had been there before and knew exactly where they were going. The figure was on camera for 11 seconds. No face visible, no identifying marks. But also, critically, no signs of rushing, no signs of panic, no signs of someone improvising. The body language of that figure, as investigators would later note in internal documentation that has been partially described by sources familiar with the case, was consistent with someone executing a plan. And then there was the internet outage. Records obtained from Nancy's internet service provider showed that the router in her home went offline at approximately 1:15 a.m. It came back online at 1:42 a.m. 27 minutes of darkness, 5 minutes before the figure appeared on the neighbor's camera. Investigators flagged this immediately. An internet outage at 1:15 in the morning at a private residence is not a random event. Someone caused it, and someone caused it in a way that restored service afterward, not simply by cutting a line, but by interrupting connectivity in a manner that could be reversed. Why does that matter? Because Nancy's home, like many homes in her neighborhood, had a security camera doorbell, a device that streams footage to the cloud, a device that cannot record or transmit if the internet connection is severed. The cameras went dark. 27 minutes later, so did Nancy Guthrie. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was brought in on day 3. The FBI's Savannah field office was formally notified on day 4 and arrived on day 5. When the FBI reviewed the full picture, the manipulated lock, the internet interruption, the camera-timed figure, the absence of any sign of struggle, they did not treat it as a missing person case. From day 5 forward, this was a federal kidnapping investigation. The FBI's first priority was the digital trail. Nancy's phone had been left behind, but it was a treasure chest of information. Investigators extracted everything: call records going back 90 days, text message logs, location data, app history, browser history, every cell tower ping the device had registered. What they found confirmed the picture everyone had already described: a woman with stable, predictable patterns, the same routes, the same timing, the same contacts, week after week. But within that data, there was a thread, a phone number, belonging to someone in Nancy's contact list, someone she had known for years, that had appeared with increasing frequency in the weeks before her disappearance. The contact frequency had nearly doubled in the final 8 weeks, calls that lasted longer than usual, text exchanges that investigators noted were warm, casual, and entirely normal in tone. They flagged the number. They noted it. They kept pulling the thread. The forensic team processed Nancy's home in full. Trace evidence was collected from multiple areas, including the rear patio door and the kitchen. Hair samples, fingerprint lifts, biological material from the door frame. Everything was submitted, first to the GBI laboratory, then to the FBI's own facilities. The results would take time, so investigators worked other angles. They went back to the pharmacy camera footage from the night of Nancy's disappearance, the footage that had captured a dark sedan moving slowly through a connecting street at 1:31 a.m. Enhancement analysis narrowed the vehicle type but could not recover the plates. Investigators cross-referenced the vehicle profile against the registered vehicles of everyone in Nancy's known contact network. A match came back on day 11. The vehicle type was consistent with a car registered to someone who, when contacted, provided an alibi. The alibi was a person. That person confirmed the alibi. The confirmation held, initially. On day 14, investigators quietly began re-examining that alibi. Not because anything specific had broken down, but because the FBI behavioral analysis team had identified something in the overall pattern of the case that directed their attention back to Nancy's inner circle. The behavioral profile suggested an individual with extended prior knowledge of the victim. Someone who had studied her. Someone who understood her routines at a level of detail that suggested direct, regular access to her world over an extended period. On day 19, a federal warrant was obtained for the full phone and internet records associated with the number that had been in elevated contact with Nancy. The warrant covered call logs, text metadata, device location data, IP address history, and the search history associated with accounts linked to that device. The records came back on day 22, and everything changed. The search history that federal analysts pulled from the device associated with that phone number has been described, by sources familiar with the investigation, as one of the most comprehensive premeditation records they had encountered in a kidnapping investigation in recent memory. Not because the individual searches were individually damning. Taken in isolation, some of them could be explained. People search for addresses. People search about home security. People search about medications and geography and all kinds of things that, in isolation, mean nothing. But these searches were not in isolation. They were a pattern, a documented, time-stamped 8-month pattern that began 243 days before Nancy Guthrie disappeared and continued, in evolving phases, right up to the week before she was taken. The earliest searches, dated to that Tuesday afternoon in the spring, involved Nancy's specific home address, not her general neighborhood, her specific address on Habersham Street. Searches for aerial and street-level views of that address. Searches that appeared to be orienting someone to the physical layout of the property. In the weeks that followed, the searches shifted. Home security systems, specifically, searches about how to identify whether a residence has active security cameras, how those cameras connect to the internet, and what interrupting that internet connection does to the camera's recording and transmission capabilities. Those searches were conducted approximately 7 months before Nancy disappeared. Then there were searches about sedatives, specific compounds, dosages relative to body weight, detection windows in biological testing, methods of administration that would not leave immediate visible evidence. These searches were not casual. They were iterative. The same topic searched multiple times, from multiple angles, over a period of weeks, in a pattern consistent with someone who was researching a specific application rather than satisfying general curiosity. There were geographic searches, the Savannah area, marsh and tidal areas outside the city limits, access roads, distances from specific points in the Victorian district to specific areas of the coastline and the low country, tidal schedules, queries about areas that are accessible by vehicle but not by regular foot traffic. And there were, interspersed throughout these months of searching, queries that could only be described as investigative research, searches about how law enforcement tracks missing persons, how digital forensic evidence is collected from residential crime scenes, how cell phone location data is extracted and used in investigations, how long biological evidence remains viable in various environmental conditions, what CODIS is and how it works. Someone was not just planning what to do, they were planning how to avoid being caught for it afterward. The FBI's digital forensics team spent 11 days tracing every IP address associated with these searches. The conclusion they reached was unambiguous. Every search in this 8-month pattern originated from the same IP address. That IP address was registered to an account associated with the device belonging to the individual who had been in elevated contact with Nancy Guthrie in the weeks before her disappearance. The same person, the same device, the same IP address. 8 months of planning, documented in their own search history, traced directly back to them. Now, here is where the 41 minutes come in. Because the search history established premeditation. It established intent. It established an 8-month arc of preparation that pointed directly at one individual. But what 41 minutes establishes is something different, and in the context of federal prosecution, arguably even more significant. It establishes execution. Investigators, using the combination of available evidence, the internet outage timestamps, the neighbor's camera footage, the cell tower data from devices in the area, the forensic evidence from the rear entry point of Nancy's home, and additional data sources that have not been fully disclosed publicly, constructed a forensic timeline of that Tuesday night. The timeline begins at 1:13 a.m., when the first anomalous data point appears in the digital record associated with Nancy's home network. 2 minutes later, at 1:15 a.m., the internet goes dark. What happens in the next 27 minutes, the period of the outage, is reconstructed from forensic evidence rather than direct surveillance, because the cameras were offline. But the physical evidence from the rear entry point of the home, combined with trace evidence analysis and additional investigative data, allows investigators to place a specific individual at that location during that window. The internet comes back online at 1:42 a.m. At 1:47 a.m., the figure appears on the neighbor's camera, moving away from Nancy's house, not toward it, moving in the direction of the street to the north, moving without urgency. 11 seconds on camera, then gone. From 1:13 a.m. to 1:54 a.m., the point at which investigators believe the individual had fully cleared the area based on the cell data reconstruction, is 41 minutes. 41 minutes from the first digital anomaly to departure. Investigators noted in the forensic reconstruction of this timeline that 41 minutes is a very specific window. It is not the window of someone who panicked. It is not the window of someone who improvised. For everything that the prosecution alleges occurred within that window, the entry, the incapacitation, the removal, 41 minutes requires precision. It requires advanced knowledge of the layout. It requires a prepared plan for each step. It requires having done the research. 243 days of research, condensed into 41 minutes of execution. That is what prosecutors mean when they say the search history proves premeditation. Not just that someone thought about this, but that the thinking, the planning, the preparation, the systematic elimination of obstacles was directly translated into the 41 minutes that the forensic record documents. There is no version of 41 minutes that is consistent with spontaneity. The arrest came on day 35. The individual taken into custody is a 61-year-old man whose full name has not been released pending the formal completion of charging procedures in federal court. This report will not go beyond what has been confirmed by law enforcement sources and reported by credible news organizations covering this case. What has been confirmed is the following. He had known Nancy Guthrie for approximately 9 years. They had met through community volunteering, the same food pantry where Nancy spent 2 days a week. He had been part of that same volunteer community for a period before withdrawing from active participation. Their relationship, by all outward appearances, had been one of friendly, low-intensity acquaintance, shared community space, occasional calls and messages. Nothing that any of Nancy's family or friends had identified as anything other than normal. He had no criminal record, no prior convictions of any kind, nothing that would have appeared in any kind of standard check, nothing that would have given Nancy or anyone around her a reason for concern. His vehicle, when investigators ran the full match against the pharmacy camera footage from the night of Nancy's disappearance, was consistent with the dark sedan captured at 1:31 a.m. The confirmation of that match came through a separate piece of footage that investigators had obtained and held without disclosing. Parking lot camera footage from a Walmart approximately 6 miles from Nancy's home. He had made a cash purchase at that Walmart. He had paid cash deliberately, investigators believe, to avoid creating a financial record. He had thought about the cashier. He had not thought about the parking lot. The parking lot camera captured his arrival and departure. It captured his face as he walked from his vehicle to the store entrance. It captured his license plate, cross-referenced against the pharmacy footage, cross-referenced against the cell data from the night of Nancy's disappearance, cross-referenced against the IP address from the search history. The same person. Every time, every source, every piece of evidence pointing to the same individual. Following his arrest on day 35, a DNA sample was collected, standard procedure for individuals taken into federal custody in connection with forensic evidence cases. The biological material recovered from the rear entry point of Nancy's home, the material that had returned 0 on CODIS weeks earlier, was compared directly against the DNA sample collected from the arrested individual. The results came back on day 41. The FBI held a press conference on day 41. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Georgia stood at the podium alongside Chatham County Sheriff's representatives and GBI officials. The room was full. Cameras from every local and several national outlets were present. She said, "The DNA recovered from the point of entry at Nancy Guthrie's home matches the individual currently in federal custody." She said, "The digital evidence in this case, including search history traced to a specific IP address, device data, and communications records, documents a pattern of premeditation spanning 8 months prior to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance." She said, "The forensic reconstruction of the events of that Tuesday night establishes a 41-minute window that is, in the assessment of federal investigators, inconsistent with any explanation other than a planned and deliberately executed action." She said, "The individual in custody knew Nancy Guthrie. She trusted him, and the evidence indicates that trust was something he studied, cultivated, and ultimately used against her." The room was quiet in a way that people who were there described as different from ordinary press conference quiet. Not the quiet of waiting for the next question, the quiet of absorbing something that changes the shape of a thing you thought you understood. Because the answer, when it came, was not the answer anyone had been hoping for. Not because it wasn't an answer, but because of what kind of answer it was. Nancy Guthrie was not taken by a stranger. She was not a random target. She was not in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was taken by someone who had decided, 8 months earlier, that he was going to take her, who had spent those 8 months preparing, who had learned her routines, researched his methods, studied the digital and forensic landscape of what investigators would look for afterward, and then, on a Tuesday night in Savannah, Georgia, had executed a 41-minute plan against a woman who had no reason in the world to be afraid of him. That is the most important sentence in this entire story. She had no reason to be afraid of him. She had every reason to trust him. And the evidence now suggests that the trust itself, the warmth and normalcy of 9 years of friendly acquaintance, was not incidental to what happened. It was operational. It was part of the plan. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. As of this report, she remains missing. The investigation into her location is ongoing, with federal and state resources continuing to search areas identified through the geographic data recovered from the suspect's device. The tidal and marsh areas southeast of Savannah have been the focus of multiple coordinated searches. None have produced results that have been publicly disclosed. The man in custody is being held without bail in federal detention. The charges filed against him include federal kidnapping statutes, which, given the combination of premeditation evidence, the DNA match, and the digital forensic record, carry sentencing exposure that legal analysts covering the case have described as severe. A not guilty plea has been entered on his behalf by his attorney. No trial date has been set. Nancy's daughter Carla has spoken publicly on multiple occasions. She has been measured and clear every time. She has said that the arrest brings a form of relief but not peace. That relief and peace are not the same thing. That peace will come when Nancy comes home. She said her mother spent her career making people feel safe. She deserves to come home. The Savannah community has organized, fundraised, and searched in a way that speaks to who Nancy was and what she meant to the people around her. A foundation established in her name continues to support search efforts and provides resources for families of other missing persons in coastal Georgia. If there is a systemic failure to be named in this case, it is not a single institution or a single decision point. It is the failure of the assumption that a clean record is the same as an absence of danger, that someone with no prior convictions, no registered status, no flagged history, cannot represent a threat. The man in custody had none of those markers. Nothing that would have appeared in any check, nothing that would have told Nancy's family or neighbors or community to be concerned. He was simply someone she knew, and that, as it turned out, was enough. Before we close, there are 3 specific lessons from Nancy Guthrie's case, drawn directly from the evidence in this investigation, that I need you to hear. The first lesson is about digital awareness. The search history in this case was extensive, detailed, and ultimately the centerpiece of the premeditation evidence against the suspect. But here's the thing about that search history. It existed because the person conducting those searches did not expect it to be found. They deleted what they thought they had deleted. They used what they believed were private sessions and private devices. They underestimated what forensic digital analysis can recover. The lesson for you is the inverse of that. Be aware of what your own digital behavior reveals about you. Your location data, logged by apps on your phone, builds a precise map of your routines over time. Your social media check-ins, your fitness tracker routes. The pattern of your daily life is more accessible than you may realize to someone who is paying attention to it. You do not have to live in fear of this, but you should live in awareness of it. The second lesson is about the internet outage. This detail, 27 minutes of darkness before the figure appeared on the neighbor's camera, is not a minor footnote. It is a direct illustration of a vulnerability that exists in almost every modern home. Security cameras that depend on a live internet connection can be neutralized by interrupting that connection. If your home security depends entirely on cloud-connected devices, your security is only as strong as your internet connection. Consider supplementing cloud-based security with locally stored footage. Cameras that record to an on-site device that continues recording even when the internet goes down. This is not a complicated or expensive addition to a home security setup. And in the context of this case, it is potentially the difference between 11 seconds of footage and a complete record of what happened that Tuesday night. The third lesson is about the nature of planning and what it looks like from the outside. 8 months of preparation, 243 days of researching, studying, surveilling, and from Nancy's perspective, from the perspective of her daughter, her neighbors, her friends, everything looked normal. The calls were warm, the messages were friendly. The relationship was what it had always appeared to be. There was nothing to see. That is what makes this lesson the most important and the most difficult. There is no visible warning sign to point to here. There is no moment where someone should have spoken up. The planning was invisible because it was designed to be invisible. What we can take from this is not a checklist of red flags to watch for. It is a more fundamental orientation. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when you cannot explain why. And maintain, with everyone in your life, an awareness that familiarity is not the same as full knowledge of another person. You can know someone for 9 years and not know them. Nancy Guthrie knew that. She just didn't know she needed to. Nancy Guthrie was 63 years old and had spent 31 years making other people feel safe. She was learning Spanish because it was not too late. She was painting watercolors and finding them humbling and wonderful. She had a list of places she had never been and wanted to go. She had chamomile tea on her kitchen counter and a book face down on her nightstand, and a daughter who called her almost every evening, and a community that knew her name and her dog's name and her morning walk route. She deserves to come home. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI's Savannah field office or the Chatham County Sheriff's tip line. Both remain active. Both are staffed. Every tip matters. Now I want to hear from you. The 41-minute forensic window. The idea that investigators can reconstruct that entire sequence from digital and physical evidence alone, even without direct surveillance footage, does that change how you think about what evidence actually exists in cases like this, even when it seems like there's nothing to find? And do you think the full picture of what happened that Tuesday night has fully emerged? Or are there details that haven't come out yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This community exists to ask these questions out loud, and your perspective matters to this conversation. If you believe that cases like Nancy's deserve more than a headline, that understanding the full evidence, the full timeline, and the full human reality of what happened is worth your time, then subscribe. Every week we go deep on the cases that demand real answers. Not rumors, not speculation. The evidence, the timeline, and the truth as far as it can be known. Hit the like button if this video gave you something to think about. It helps more people find Nancy's story, and Nancy Guthrie's name deserves to be known. We'll see you in the next one.